So yeah, we're doing an Ask Me Anything. I mean, this is just a chance to talk about user research and hear from people about, yeah, what some things you're thinking about, or you have questions about. Um, if people want to, I know we're chatting, but if people want to use the chat function and like say where you're from, or post your LinkedIn profile or your homepage, or any way that that any of us want to connect afterwards, you're welcome to use that for that. Um, but yeah, Andrea, Danielle, Cheryl, did you have things about user research that you were hoping to talk about today?
I think from my perspective, it's more like, sorry, Cheryl.
Go ahead.
It's more like the quant and qual and the balance of it, because what we see a lot, because I work for USAA, and what we see a lot of is a qualitative research. Like right now, we're totally redesigning our claims digital first notice of loss experience, and see a lot of qualitative studies like user Zoom testing, things of that nature, right? It's basically usability, but with a smaller audience. But it's hard for me to only go off of qual data. So I'm just kind of like trying to listen in to see what everybody else's perspective around research is, in order to deliver a quality product, essentially. Like, where's that balance with quant and qual?
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yeah,
And
of course.
you said here's your area of interest, and you said you wanted to listen in, so I don't want to push you to talk about it, but you sort of opened up
No,
some interesting.
fine.
So, so can you say a little more about, like, you have a sense that you don't want to rely just on the qual, and when you say qual, like, you're talking about a really specific sort of type of data, like you said, these small sample
Yeah.
usability tests. So what's your
Yeah, for
concern?
example, our design partners will post it on, user Zoom. I think y'all might be from, I don't know, maybe it's just our company, but basically doing like showing them the prototypes without like a company name on it to about 12 to 15 users. And like they'll show them, let's say, like 3 or 4 prototypes, different ways of doing it. And then of course, the individuals respond with their voice, and then they also, of course, like answer some questions. But then we're making decisions off of that, right, alone. And I'm like, that's really tough for me to make a decision based off of 12 to 15 people, which is enough, is my understanding from a qualitative perspective, like a study. But at the same time, I'm like, I feel like we need to do more with like more users, essentially, not base our decision based on 15 people every time, because they go and test prototypes with that amount of people every time, and then we make decisions based off of that alone. And that's hard for me. So because we're building new, right? So we could also have a good understanding of how our current digital experience is. We have, funnel data, all of that, right? That feeds into what we're going to be doing. But as far as the new designs are concerned, we're basing it off of, again, the qualitative studies.
Yeah, and sorry if this is stating the obvious, but you want the method to match to the question, right? So some design decisions, or getting direction, or trying to understand if this thing is workable or not as you're working something out and kind of iterating through prototypes. Yeah, kind of quick evaluations make sense. If there are, I think you want an overall. I mean, the phrase du jour is mixed methods, which seems to be like the hot jargon now, which is just about combining different methods. Good morning, doggy. It's about, yes, anyone with a dog knows that one. Combining, we're at this stage of the project, we have these questions, we're going to use these tools. We're at this stage. So if you're trying to understand, maybe there's a point in the process that is, you're changing something that people used to do from, previous workflow or previous interface to something else. And there's a lot of risk there. maybe that's a point in the process where, oh yeah, we need to do, maybe it's a larger survey to try to get some numbers and see if this favorably impacts. I mean, I'm making up the specifics here, right? But that, I mean, to me, the sort of acceptability of a change is different than like the navigability of a button, or the sort of be able to complete a task, or the understandability of a layout. I'm going to stop saying words that end in ability, but there's different things that you want to assess at different points. And it sounds like you're feeling like there isn't a sufficient mix to kind of look at all the different things at different stages. But I guess I wouldn't want to replace what the design partners are doing with UserZoom with something else. But I think trying to identify, well, what are we not getting, because we're going to ship something, and so what do we need to learn about those sort of business decisions as opposed to those layout decisions? Is that, I mean, again, I don't really know, just from like the kind of high level view that you gave, but does that start to speak to what you're thinking about?
Yes, it does. Exactly.
I recommend this paper all the time. It's called "When to Use Which User Research Experience Method." It's on the Nielsen Norman page, and it's written by Christian Rohrer, Rohrer. And it's like maybe it's like a 6-year-old paper, but it's pretty good. It talks about like all the methods that we have at our disposal. And he does a nice job. Like, there's the nice graphic, which you may see in like every UX research talk. But as he goes through the paper, he talks about, okay, if you're here, you have these kinds of questions, you want to use these kinds of methods. If you're here, da 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 da. He kind of walks through, how to choose the methods to bring to bear based on the stage in development that you're at. So that might help you. Go ahead.
Can you tell me again when it was called? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I said it really quickly. When to use which user, I'm going to write it. I could have just Googled it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Awesome. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
It's a really easy to understand description of it, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Andrea started her question, I started thinking, oh, maybe my question is like earlier in the process, but maybe it's actually very similar. So I'm actually at a small company, and so we're maybe 40 to 50 people total. And I'm trying to rebuild a process with an engineering team that has literally one user in the company. It's a very key process, but there's only one, maybe two, if we can include like a short-term contractor, person who's using it. And so it's a process that we've had in the company, for taking in external data, process that we've had for a few years. It does not work well. That's the need to rebuild it. And I'm worried, I guess, about over-engineering it to her specific kind of workflow, thought process, et cetera, so that it's not more wide, more available to other people to use. So I guess in that sense, it's kind of like having one very limited data point. It's also a strong opinion. And so yeah, any thoughts on that, I guess?
Do you have hypotheses about who might become users in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of if we decide to put more resources on that process, if we decide to hire another person in a very similar role. For right now, we only have one person in that functional capacity. One plus a junior person that just started. So yeah.
So you have the junior they can replicate I'm new to this process. I don't have a lot of embedded sort of paths for solving this.
Right, and there's also no historical like emotional baggage, et cetera, either.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think you've got some good clues as to what to sort of check for. If you have data or suspicions that the person who's kind of been living with this process for a long time has some has some buy-in or attachment or, emotional relationship with it. I think that's an interesting thing to listen for and even ask about. Like, if you're talking to someone about, what are the steps that you go through, why is it that way? Has it always been that way? How did it change? Trying to unpack a lot of that stuff, right? If you just ask about how things are today, I think this is kind of the problem as you're describing it. If you just map out today, you have the suspicion you're bringing a lot forward that maybe shouldn't be brought forward, that's not there for the right reasons. So again, I hate to state the obvious, but I think those are things to ask about. I think a lot in research you can sort of say, how is it now? How was it before and why? And sort of how did we get to how is it now? How could it be in the future? And I think the way that you word those things can be helpful. Like, how could it be in the future is different than how do you want it or how should it be? Even as you're kind of stating the objective, and this person's a colleague, so they share in the organizational objectives at some base level, even if, we all do different parts of the puzzle, but to ask that person to project forward and think not like, what do they want for themselves, but, as we scale up and as we grow, this is going to be, involve different people, different levels, and become more collaborative. How would you want that state to be? Which is different. So you're inviting them to sort of solve with you and think big and think future. And I don't know I don't know this individual or the specifics, and I don't want to sound all kind of rah, but I think sometimes we get locked into our perception of how other people are participating in a process. And, sometimes that's true, but also sometimes, these kinds of exercises can give them a chance to think outside kind of what they're stuck in. So while this person may have attachment to it and kind of ownership of it and feel defensive of it, they might also be enthusiastic and kind of an advocate for breaking themselves out of that and talking about a future state. And one trick in having those conversations is to really make it a future state conversation. For example, if you're maybe not exactly this situation, but if you're interviewing someone about, how they go through something right now, and then you say, what changes could we make, or how would you like it to be different? You tend to get incremental responses.
Right.
I want it to be faster and cheaper and be able to enter more things, or whatever the sort of tactical piece is. If you say, what's this process going to look like in 2025? Or, how will your children open savings accounts, or something like that? You give them permission to think over a discontinuity, kind of leap ahead. Even if you're going to build something in 8 months, you still invite them to talk about this far future. And then it's easier for them, to then think about, explore what the possibilities are. Well, okay, if we're really going far in the future, then I think by that time we'll have worked out a way to divide this thing up, or whatever the sort of future state would be. The question sometimes people ask is, if a genie could come in and wave a magic wand, what would you want to see different? So that's giving them permission, but I personally like putting it into a future horizon. So all the reasons they know that we can't sort of incrementally get to this future state, come away. So yeah, you have this unique challenge with one person who holds a lot of knowledge, but I would look for ways to empower them to have a different conversation with you and see, start peeling back the layers that way. So again, what's happening now? What's the history and the evolution of how we got there? And then, looking into the future. And all that gives you insight into the process and what's cruft, what's sort of accumulated for, negative reasons, and what's the core, and where are they, what's the part of the process that makes them, badass, and what's the part of the process that's labor intensive? Like, you start to see qualitatively, being able to assess different aspects of it and think about, yeah, well then, using your judgment and your creative process and your design sense, like, what does a future state look like for that?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I guess I've got a question that's basically, I want to be certain that if I'm only able to speak to a limited number of people, because time and logistics and all of that, how do I add, is just pulling a few people at random good enough, or are there some better, techniques to make sure that I'm going to be getting the most out of that time that I spend with them, in terms of sort of the steps I take before going into those conversations?
Yeah, it's worth thinking a little bit about, well, who are the people that are going to give me perspective on the, the areas I want to understand. So thinking about, what you want to build. And so, yeah, people who have taken your training is one. People that signed up and canceled, people that are on your newsletter that have never taken one. I think we often want to do research with it's like, go talk to your users is kind of the standard line, but I think in user research, your goal is to understand the factors that impact what you're going to design. But the people that can give you that perspective, it's not a one-to-one mapping as to your customers or your users. So people who love your competitor's product or service, people that are absolutely the right targets for your product. They have a need. You can determine that through some way of assessing them, but haven't become a customer, can give you some perspective. So thinking about putting together a sample, I think normally most of who I'd want to talk to would represent someone that's involved in this behavior, that's doing the thing, that has, used us or wants to use us, but trying to get a little bit of contrast in there, could be interesting. I'm trying to speak as broadly as possible. Obviously, the key is in your specifics, right? So what are those factors? I think you've got to think about what that is. And some of that exists kind of anecdotally in your organization, right? You talk about those people that sign up last minute, or those people that sign up early, or those people that, haggled price, or that cancel. I don't know what sort of what's in your group, but there's situations that you talk about that may make you think, yeah, I want to understand what's that aspect of this experience about. I don't know, I'm just making up possible signals. It could be the people that fill out your evaluations, the people that don't fill out your evaluations, or the people that, you might go to your trainers and say, can you point to people who were active participants who spoke a lot in the session? Can you point to people that were reticent participants? So you may just be able to sort of call out those people because you've interacted with them. Collectively, you've interacted with them, and you may be able to name them based on some factors that you think will be interesting and have some contrast. I think contrast is, and you're going to get contrast anyway, right? If you talk to more than one person, you're going to hear some different things, but maybe setting yourself up for some contrast. And the contrast is great, I think, because, right, you create a narrative about, in your head, you have some assumptions. When I say active and reticent participants, we start building a whole story, but those people may be more similar than they are different. The other thing that happens is that Group A will describe something that they don't do, and you will realize, oh, everyone in Group B does that thing, but never said it, and we never noticed that about Group B. So Group B maybe is like the people we really want to be selling to. Group A is the people that, or whatever, they're lead users, or they're laggards, or they fit some other category. Well, they say, a thing about it that I like or that I struggle with is this, and you realize they just articulated an unstated common factor in your main group, but no one in the main group ever said that. because it's sort of a thing that you just take as written or take for granted. And so this other group you talk to, which again might just be one or two people or one person, helps you realize something about who you want to build for that you didn't hear, and so you only noticed it in contrast. Does that make sense, Ross?
Yeah, no, it does. And actually, I think that's a really useful, way to think about it is like the parameters for people that you want to speak to are there based on the way that, I've known, or the trainers or people have known how they are interacting and using things, and sort of, so I guess I'm thinking like demographically, how do you make sure by your sort of usual indicators of like how you would usually group people to make sure that you're getting
Right.
a broad perspective, but the parameters being like how they're actually interacting with us is what is important, is sort of what I'm getting. Is that wrong?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would rather sample based on like someone's relationship to the behavior we want to understand,
Yeah.
as opposed to, and doesn't mean some of those aren't demographic, right? Someone who has a corporate job, someone who's self-employed, someone who works for a startup are, those are sort of demographic types of things, right? You classify them based on their employment. Well, that's also an indicator of budget available for training, which might be something that you want to understand. But budget available for training is like a hard factor, and category of employment is still demographic, but it's a softer factor, and probably there are other pieces behind that. So the narrative of the decision to spend the budget on something that you offered would be something to explore and contrast among, again, I'm just making stuff up here. I don't know your specifics or where you'd want to probe, but those would be things that, it's not sort of classic demographic, right? Like, age and geography and so on. I mean, it's just at a high level. Those are kind of my thoughts there.
No, that's interesting. That's a useful take. I appreciate that.
And does that prompt any thoughts from either of you, Andrea or Cheryl?
I think that the statement about this like unspoken assumptions and sort of, or what's taken for granted is a good one. Just in the sense of like, oh, we assumed we needed to do this, but maybe we don't, or maybe that part doesn't need to be a manual process. I think is worth looking into, for sure.
Yeah. Right. This is so much about our assumptions, right? And putting activities in that can help us check our assumptions. And I think figuring out who to talk to is one of them. People that are interested in speaking to you is a bias, Ross, for sure. Yeah. But there's no way to do this without introducing bias. Like bias is part of life. It's not, I know it's a sort of dirty word socially for obvious reasons, but people are afraid of bias in research. But I think understanding, hey, we're talking to our, people who have used us 4 times in the last calendar year. And those are leading users but they are going to be able to speak most eloquently about how they experience our value proposition. So we're choosing not to do sort of some representative, I don't know what shape of curve I'm drawing, but there's some curve of this versus that. And so it just kind of goes back to to Andrea's question, like in certain methods, you would want to look at the population to be representative. And in certain methods, you want to accentuate things to kind of get the highest signal to make the right decisions. Right? If you're doing new designs on usertesting.com, maybe you don't want to look at people onboarding for the first time. Like that's a thing to design for, and a thing you need to understand. But that particular segment of all the learning that you're doing, that is not as helpful for trying to understand like how an expert user understands current navigation flow versus new navigation flow. Mm-hmm. So, in Andrew's case, we're sort of talking about what's the research plan with all the methods. And sort of, there you want to kind of cover everything. And Ross, I'm not saying you need to do a million things. You just need to think about what's this thing we're trying to do and sort of, how do we optimize for it? So, I mean, that was your question to begin with.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I certainly, and I've just noticed in conversations that we have, internally, is that you can sort of become, we have the ethos is like, the customer breaks the tie, but then we almost might be sort of passing on the decision-making responsibility onto like, oh, well, we'll get the customer will tell us. I know we try and avoid that, but it does seem to be a thing that's kind of like in there. If like I'm unsure and there's an element of my confidence lacking in a thing, that it's sort of being like I'm pushing the responsibility for making a decision off myself. How do you avoid that? Because I think you can go too far the other way, right? That you're just we don't know, they can figure it out kind of thing. And I feel like that's not a mindset I want to be in.
Yeah, right. This is do you remember the articles? Doug Bowman quitting Google wrote this post. He was a designer at Google. And he wrote this post about Google testing 20 Shades of Blue. It went sort of viral. I think even the New York Times wrote about it. This idea that at Google scale, they can see which one generates more money. Excuse me, or more click-throughs. And it was really taken to let the customer decide, to what seemed to be a ridiculous degree, right? That they're going to literally decide. And I love that statement as kind of as a metaphor, as a symbol, but I'm not fond of it as kind of a literal thing, right? That somehow I think the more we talk about research as testing and only testing, we abdicate responsibility for design. And by design, I mean, the thing that we all do, like making a set of choices to create a product or service that could be an experience in a certain way that will bring value to somebody and be effective for our organization. I mean, you can call that product management. I don't care kind of what label you put on that discipline wise, but that's what we have to do. And so I feel like, choose your research approach that will help you in the decision making. So yeah, we let them decide in terms of, we create opportunities to gather data so that we can make informed decisions. But I worked with someone, they called it, was either iterating to the mean, or they even had a worse version of it, like iterating to the lowest common denominator. And it's a great, you're scratching on a lot of great stuff that I feel like we don't talk about very well. We use words like innovation, but all the great case studies in innovation they're about disregarding the research, right? The research told us that, no one would want, I mean, the Post-it note, such a cliche, but no one would want something that didn't stick very well. Right. And so there was research that was disregarded, or there was other signals that they were looking for. I think, and this is so long ago, I can't remember even the apocrypha about it, but I feel like it, what didn't Post-it notes failed every market research test, but somebody kind of pushed it through, but then the reorders were high once it got into the stores, or there's some story like that. So, what signal are you going to listen to? I mean, so somebody had a belief in something and it didn't fit into anything that existed. So how do you test if what you're trying to do is transformative? There's no model for that. You can do research, but it's not testing, where testing is should we do this? Yes, no, 87% with this amount of certainty, there we can make the investment. We tell those stories, we kind of hold them up as successes, but I don't know how to do that, because that's about all the things we hate, right? Someone who claims they know more than the research and they kind of insist on doing, that's ego. We don't like that, and yet we like these success stories about ego. So I feel like, as a user research person, I'm sort of in the crosshairs between these kinds of stories that we like, and then what we kind of want to do in our daily practice. I feel like I'm getting a little far from your question.
No, but I do think it's certainly interesting, to see, that, because those stories are great and lovely, but that's not the norm. right? Or you know, like if everyone just like went for the thing that like they think is like the best, you know, this is my great idea, then you'd probably see a lot of people just falling flat on their ass pretty quickly, right? So
Right.
yeah, I mean, like, are those stories like the exception that prove the rule, or you know, yeah, where do they fit in like this idea that, you know, testing everything is the best way to get your results?
I mean, if I had to give a short answer, which is not sufficient to
It's not
capture the
possible.
complexity,
Yeah.
well, yeah, not for me. You know, I think there's a difference between generative research and testing. And you know, Cheryl, the process investigation you're talking about doing, like there's a lot of possibilities open to you based on what you learn. And I can imagine, given the context you're describing, it would be hard to test those for the kind of success we would want. But you can be really, really informed with some, you know, again, you have all these interesting constraints in your situation, but let's just, I don't know, admit somebody who's coming in 40 minutes into the meetup. All right. Welcome. I think, you know, using research to understand the world or a process or a behavior or, you know, what is going on with somebody, and then making some decisions to kind of connect the dots in a creative, innovative way. And then, you know, managing your risk, which of course that creates risk. So you can look for signals step by step by step, and not test, I think, in the traditional way that when we say that word, I think is, you know, you have to combine some different, wear some different hats, combine some different kinds of things, but the research is still there, but it tells you what the world is like. And then you have to, you know, innovate within that. So, you know, waking up one morning and saying Post-it notes, and it is different than, you know, getting a rich view of people's lives, of their work processes and their goals, and thinking about how you want to, innovate within that.
Yeah, I would say I think part of the challenge for me is also I'm like the first, you know, product person in the company, and granted, by having been at the organization for a few years before I switched into this role, I have at least those personal relationships already that helps me. But just kind of bringing in some of these, we'll say, newfangled ideas into the company has also been an interesting challenge too, of saying like, in terms of the engineering development, it's like just that concept of not everything that they're working on every time will turn into a useful feature for everyone or anyone. Sometimes it's just we're testing things out to see if this is feasible or not, or if it could be useful. And so just if you had any thoughts on kind of changing, adjusting people's mindsets or expectations there of how, this work goes.
I love the way that you're framing it. I mean, isn't this about, you know, organizational knowledge and kind of being a learning culture? And is one thing, like every experiment or everything that you try and decide not to do, I feel like there's a zoomed in takeaway, like, okay, well, we just saved ourselves development dollars, and we saved ourselves, you know, from making a mistake and having consequence. So that's a win. Right? It's not just more features. It's the right features that have the right impact and benefit our customers and benefit us. So that, you know, and that's similar to, I think, how you're kind of framing it. But also every time you do this, you learn something else. And I think sometimes that knowledge is hard to capture or document. You know, we tried this, it didn't work. We tried this, it did work. We tried this, it didn't work. But I think there's something in the bones that kind of accumulates, you know, as you start, because you're exploring a space, it's yours. What does our company do with these workflows and these screens and these customers? And, you know, it has nothing to do with what Google does or, you know, what Facebook does or what Salesforce does. Like, it's very unique to you all. And so, you know, exploring the margins of things and trying different things, and you know, it's like that's how we learn, right? That's how like babies learn or whatever, right? You go and touch things and see what you think, and then kind of pull back and try something else. You know, I don't know if there's like some DevOps person, or sorry, design ops person that would say, you know, here's how you do the knowledge management of that. Like that's certainly a big question in research ops.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
it's,
how do
you know,
you
I have an engineering team of like 4, product, which is me, and then like a variety of users for different aspects of the things that the engineering team is working on. But I do think it's an interesting idea to put it as like, well, this is an informatics or engineering experiment, because we also have I'm a biotech company. So we have a lab R&D group. They run experiments all the time. They do assay development. Why don't we, like, you know, so maybe it's just putting it in that language so that it's translatable to our management team.
I like
in
that.
that sense.
That's part of your culture. It's part of what you're excellent at, is being able to do that.
We just have, maybe haven't formalized it as much on the informatics side at being part of the process.
I like that.
Just because it's been hidden, in the sense like we've always done it. We just never told anyone about it along the way until we were done. We just said, hey, look, we're done. We've got this tool now.
Right. Here's this thing. Yeah. That's good. That's a really good insight.
I guess on that point, I've got sort of a bit more generic question, but maybe some tips and tricks on, you know, sharing insights that you do gather from your user research more broadly within the organization, so you can create that sort of shared knowledge. You know, like how would you go about that? Do you put it in a document somewhere and say like, here you go, guys, and then it sort of never gets read again? Or like, you know, how do you share that more broadly and help it stick?
I mean, I like the example that MailChimp has been talking about for many years. They've gone through several iterations of kind of design leadership and research leadership, but a thing that I've heard them continue to talk about is this idea of, you know, each initiative always gets 3 deliverables, 3 outputs. I think maybe is even a better way of talking about it. And this is, I think I get the sense MailChimp has a pretty specific culture. So what those 3 things are specific to MailChimp, and I think you could adapt them. But so 3 things. One is, you know, they do some research, they learn some things. An email with bullet points that could be distributed broadly. A presentation deck, you know, that walks through a story and that has images and you know, kind of unpacks what they've done. And then when you have that, then you can have, you know, an internal brown bag, or, you know, a lunch and learn, or whatever your company's kind of flavor of that is. And a link to all the raw data. So some place of kind of archiving that. So people want to go watch the videos or look at the survey results. So it's all, it's about, I think, being transparent and kind of giving people access, and then giving them very different paths in. So that's a recognition about how different people in the organization want to, you know, experience or consume this information and be able to take action on it. So that might be different, you know, in any of your organizations, but the idea of just building in, we're going to output in different ways. I'm working with a group right now, and what they're trying to, they're a startup and they're in many different directions, but what they're trying to do is figure out how to just bubble up some stuff. And I don't know, my understanding of it, and we're in the midst of figuring it out, is just trying to create signal, just trying to create some discussion. So, and I feel like in research, this is a lot about, a lot of my projects are like this. There's just, there's different kinds of data. There's sort of stories and anecdotes and examples and just like little bits. And then there's conclusions and implications and recommendations and design decisions. And I think, you know, when you do research, you're under so much pressure to get to that second part. I think we sometimes undersell or underappreciate ourselves the value of that other piece. So Ross, you're going to start talking to these people and, you know, sort of understand some part of their relationship to Mind the Product's training offering, for example, something that you might be doing. You know, just being able to say, well, I talked to someone today who was incredibly enthusiastic about online training, and they go to 7 free webinars a week, and they sign up every 3 times a quarter for training. That was a lot more than I had ever heard anyone talk about. And that would be like your whole sort of micro anecdote. Sharing things like that and setting expectations, right? That's something you can put in an email or Slack channel. It doesn't go in a deliverable, a report, or research readout, but it's, again, creating a culture where you're sharing stuff. And it starts to just plant little seeds, and it starts to make data something that's actually composed of real people with experiences and opinions and things that they like and don't like and that are surprised by. So looking for lo-fi ways to, you know, create a discussion about the things that we learn in research, I think helps pave the way for trying to discuss the things that we have concluded from research, the things that we recommend, or the opportunities that we see. They're kind of these bigger things. You can engage people in these smaller ways. It's also good for us. I mean, if you are, you know, talking to people and you got to like write one bullet point for the Slack channel, like that process, that's what we call analysis. You take a bunch of data and pull a thing out to make sense. Every time you do that, you're kind of becoming more engaged with what the material has to tell you. So that's a great discipline to practice. And you really ought to manage expectations, right? I think just saying, here's what I'm sharing and why. Here's a thing I'm excited about. Here's a thing that I was curious. Here's a thing that's interesting. We're continuing to do this work, and we will be, you know, meeting on this and this date to talk about what the key outcomes can be. So you're not, you don't want to say, I found this data point, now go and build something. You're trying to position against that, but you're just trying to create low effort engagement in things that will, you know, perk people up. So 2 things. One, do that. The other, have sort of deliverables that are multifaceted, or outputs that are multifaceted, that let people engage in different ways very practically, based on who they are. And then the research that also has the advantage of those things live on, right? If you're wrapping something up, no one is going to go back to that data. But 3 months from now, someone might be like, oh, didn't Ross talk to somebody who was this and this? Let me go kind of find that. So making that available at the time, just it lets people come back to it and invites them to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super useful. And I think we do that to an extent. So it's good to be like, okay, well, that's sort of part of what we do, is like just dropping insights and anecdotes and things that we've heard, not necessarily from, you know, any sort of formal research, but certainly like a big part of what we do is community based, and so we're talking to people often, and we do share that stuff in Slack. So that's good to know that we are doing some of those things that you recommend already. So
that's great.
Good times.
Hello, R. I don't know your first name, so I'm calling you by your initial. Do you have a question or a thought about what we're talking about?
That's Rick, by the way.
Hi, Rick. Sorry.
Sorry I joined late. I had another meeting that I'm struggling with, but yeah, I just, you know, I'm a product manager as well as an owner. And so some of the struggles I have is we don't have project managers. And my boss recommended that I take a project management course. And what it taught me is how much work I'm doing of that other side that isn't in my job description. And I mean, do you have any advice or any thoughts about that when I'm in a fairly large organization, but I'm actually tasked with both ends of it. The being in the trenches with the crew, but also doing the overall and meeting with the stakeholders and trying to get stuff done or get what their needs are.
Andrea or Ross, do you have thoughts about this particular area? I'm just putting people on the spot here.
So for me personally, I'm relatively new to the whole product field in general. My job before joining my product was event management. So the sort of managing the two, like I come from more of a project management side of things, and I'm like picking up the product management side of things. So like for me, that's quite welcome additional context and a sort of new way of processes and doing things. It sounds like you're sort of, am I right, Rick, that you're dismayed or reluctant to be sort of taking on additional things that really you feel you ought not to be doing or not be having to do anyway?
Not dismayed about it. It's
maybe that was the wrong term.
Management was approached, I guess, a few years ago about project management. And I actually have worked with project managers in our IT department, and they bring some amazing clarity to projects. It's kind of shocking how that works, but it was, in our world in software engineering, which I joined, it'll be 2 years, November, I'll have been in that field. It's been a different thing because I found out how much overlap my job has with, and we just embarked in basically a complete rewrite of our entire system. And, but not with the intent to replace it, but with the intent to make it a global product that can be used by any business unit in the company as opposed to just one business unit as it is today. So anyway, we're starting that as having to do project management and product management together. And it's an interesting quandary.
It is. I think they're definitely two separate skill sets, and it's really dependent on, because I've been in all really, product management, PO, and then project management. And so I've actually had to wear a lot of different hats. But what I can say, like given where we're currently at USA, is that I think that you can be the project manager in my mind, because I've done it. I've done like the PM / again, like PO / project management, just depending. If you're like doing something large scale, which it sounds like y'all kind of are, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I would think that you would absolutely need like a separate individual resource to help out with the project aspect of it. Because right now, like, there's no way that my team nor myself can do all the above. We absolutely need a separate project manager. So I'm not sure if that was like the question at hand, but that's the way we've approached it.
Yeah, we're in kind of an interesting spot where we're taking our existing team and we actually have split the team, and we're part of the team is working on a new project, and then the rest of us are working on the old product to get it in a state where we could put it on the shelf and put it in maintenance mode. And then with the intent of all of us being over at that project before the end of the year.
For the old or the new?
For the new, but the old, we would still be responsible for limited maintenance, but we wouldn't be doing any active developing of improvements.
We're in the same spot.
And there's with a hiring freeze and everything else that we're going through because of COVID and all that, we were kind of in a spot where there's no additional resources. We're doing with what we got.
COVID adds definitely a different element to it. And what I just from a personal standpoint, I think, because we asked for additional resources too, and we're not sure if they're going to come in or not. We met with our GM last week, so it's kind of up in the air. But if they don't give us additional resources, right, like a project manager and design resource, like our ask was huge from a 1 to 3 perspective. It was really, really big. If they don't do it, then we're saying like basically we're going to come back with, okay, well, if we can't get this amount of people, then you're only going to get this, right? You're only like, we're only able like set the boundaries, be confident in it, talk about trade-offs. That's what I've been encouraging my team to do, and us, you know, because we can't carry it all on our shoulders. There's no way, because we're also like on a legacy system, and we're moving to Guidewire, a new core system, and then building a digital surround on top of that. So to balance the old and the new, like, it takes more resources, you know? And again, if they can't, then you just got to scope it and say, you know, this is what I can do within this amount of time, given the limited constraints, you know? And somebody has to respect that once you have the data in front of them, right? Like, you know, I'm not going to be working 80 hours a week. It's just unreasonable. So, sorry if I chimed in too much there, Steve.
No, please, you have directly relevant perspective on that, and that was very insightful. I like thinking about it as a resource issue, right? Because I think just, you know, wearing multiple hats is part of people's lives and work, and well, in all parts of our lives. But you know, those. Wearing multiple hats, I think, can be exciting because they inform each other. You sort of, the more skills that you have, the more value you can bring. And, you know, a designer who can do research, a product manager who can do project management, like those are all ways that we can be more effective, but it doesn't eliminate the really point that I think both of you are trying to adapt to, which is there only are so many hours in the day, so many hours in the week. And these are all tasks that take our time and energy. And so I'm just reflecting back what you said, Andrew. It's good. Looks like we're at the hour. So I think that's our time for our conversation today. All right, Rick, Ross, thank you.
Thanks for your time, Steve.
Yes. Great to speak to
pleasure.
you all today.
Take care.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.